Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to join you. It's my first experience with an E-Club, and I'm pleased it's in our district, and I'm pleased it's one that you people initiated. The topic being the Council on Legislation. I think Ross made some interesting comments that I'd like to address too. The Council on Legislation you'll hear called all sorts of things by people who know these things, and one of them is the Parliament of Rotary. Really, I think that's an easy way of describing it. But basically, the Council on Legislation is that part of the organisation which sets and amends our Constitution and our bylaws. It's that simple. Now, the mystery that Ross mentioned is how people get involved, why they get involved, or why they don't get involved. In my experience in Rotary, most people don't want to get involved because it's legal, it's mumbo-jumbo, they don't understand it, and the people they speak to don't understand it, and therefore we ignore it, which is a pretty fair way to go if that's how you want to go. My experience in Rotary was things needed to be changed, and I'll come to that a little bit later on and you'll understand what I'm saying. Excuse me. The way a person is selected to the Council on Legislation is fairly straightforward. First of all, you need to be a person who is qualified, which means you must be a past district governor. Now, there's a lot of contention in that statement alone. Why must it be a past district governor? Why can't it be a lawyer in the district who has a penchant for this kind of constitutional law? That's a good question. But the reality is, in Rotary, like a lot of organisations, it has some special features about that organisation which are not duplicated in public corporations and public companies or private companies. Not to say that a lawyer couldn't pick it up. But if you've got a cadre of experienced people within the organisation who have the skills, who have the knowledge to represent the Rotarians in a district at an organisation which we will call a council on legislation, then why wouldn't we choose one of those people? One of the key points is, like everything else in Rotary, the pay is not very good. And even if you get a pay increase, it still isn't very good. So with the council, each district is asked to go through an election process to select one of their members who is qualified to join the council to become the councillor for that district. The way that is done, it can be done by postal ballot, it can be done by an email ballot, or it can be done by a nominating committee, which in our district isn't a common process. In many districts, nominating committees are used by clubs to elect the president-elect, by districts to elect the governor-elect, and by the district to elect the councillor and various other positions in Rotary International representing the district. In this district, though, we don't do that. We have a thing called the College of Governors, which is a loose affiliation of past district governors who will discuss matters among themselves. Then we'll take them to the district, we'll explain to the district what's going on and what the outcome is that we're looking for. And in the case of the Council on Legislation, we're looking for a suitable representative to go to the Council on Legislation to put our views and to vote on other issues which might have been raised by other districts in the world, so that that person represents District 9710 in our case, to the best of his or her ability according to the wishes of the district. So we put to the district at a district conference in the legislative session a proposal that Fred Blogg be nominated to be that district's representative to the Council on Legislation in the year 2099. And you vote and you select one of those nominees. There can be a number of nominees. The people can nominate themselves or they can be nominated by others, but they must have a nomination verified by their club president and secretary when it goes forward. Then at that district conference, you folks will elect the person to be the councillor for this district for the next Council on Legislation. So David, I think first I might take any questions on that process up to now. Then I'll talk about the time frames.
Okay, we're all unmuted. Go, fellas.
You don't have to ask questions.
Just, I'll kick it off, Bob, if that's all right. Is with any bureaucracy, and I use that word carefully, but with any bureaucracy, legislation surrounding it tends to get very complex over time. Is this the case with Rotary, or are we getting better at it?
I think we're getting better at it, but it's a perception, it's a very perceptive point, because there are people in Rotary, as there are in any organisation, who gain power from creating a mystery. And I think that has happened in Rotary in the past, but we're going a long way towards simplifying things and making the legislation much better understood and simpler to enact.
How are they doing that? Bob, it's Ross. How are they doing that?
Well, first of all, when this is another part of the discussion which we haven't got to yet, but how does one propose legislation to go to the council? An individual can, a club can, a district can. In our district, in my time, and I have been councillor for 2 cycles and have been elected for the 3rd and last cycle, because the most you can do is 3 cycles. That legislation is drafted by the club, for argument's sake, comes to the district, is discussed. It's been circulated incidentally beforehand, and it's discussed at the conference, at the legislation session, and it's approved or not approved. If it's approved, that goes off to Rotary International, to the Office of the Council on Legislation. There's a small office in Evanston, and they combine all of the proposals received from around the world, and they start to vet them for their veracity and whether or not they meet the tenets of our current constitution and our bylaws being resolutions. And if they are, then they compile a book. In 2013, the book had 358 items were received, and 80%, I'm reading, 80% of those were submitted to the Constitution Committee, and we considered 200 items at the Council on Legislation, of which 59 were adopted. Now, 2 cycles before, 500 items went to the Council on Legislation, and still only 59 of 60 were adopted. And what that tells you is the review by the Constitution and Bylaws Committee has become more effective in weeding out useless proposals, frivolous proposals, and just totally inept or ineligible proposals. So in that regard, Ross, it is getting better. There is another step which I will come to a little later.
Thanks for that. You'll talk later about what your
yes, I will. Yeah, and how much time do I have? We've had 10 minutes, haven't we?
Keep going.
Okay. So that is how the nominee is selected. The council is held every 3 years in Evanston, and currently a representative from every district in the world attends that conference, that council. That person is selected in year 3, that's 3 years out from the council, must be registered with RI by the 31st of December last year for 2016, I think that's the best way to put that. So the 31st of December 2013, representatives had to be accepted, no sorry, it's the 30th of June 2014, representatives must be registered with RI to attend the council in April 2016, so it's roughly 2 years out that the representative must be notified. That in itself is a problem. Representatives are elected a long way out. Proposals for the next council, which will be in April 2016, must be lodged with RI by December this year, 2014. Now, if somebody comes up with an idea in March 2015, that won't go to the next council until 2019. Now, in simple figures, that means it's 5 years. Either you get it within 2.5 years, or you wait another 3 years before you can have something done about anything. And we think that's too long. And that's what Ross is alluding to about something else that I'm doing. Anyway, the process now is you have to have your delegate nominated by the 30th of June 2014 for the council, which is scheduled for April 2016. And your proposals for that council in April 2016 must be completed and lodged by December 2014. Clear as mud? Good. Now, this district has been successful in a number of proposals. We are the district that put forward the proposals for satellite clubs, and we have used that process to establish new clubs twice in the district that I'm aware of, and I was involved in both of those. But I carried that proposal to 2010. We got approval for trials, and I took it back in 2013, and it was approved as a normal process now within RI for a new club can be started using the satellite club process. We're still badgering away on getting RIPEN, Rotary Youth Program of Enrichment, approved as a program of Rotary. The only advantage of that is it gives it a bit greater status, and it means it will operate in more countries than it currently does. And we're getting closer each time to getting it approved, but we haven't yet had it approved. We had a setback last year when the Americans asked, well, what's the impact on Boy Scouts America? And I saw blue at the time, but I wasn't quick enough to think of a way of handling it, and the way that will be handled in future will be, are you here for Rotary or Boy Scouts America? So we think RIPEN will get up the next time around because we're getting a lot of support from Canada, the UK, some Americans, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and I can reel off a whole lot of other countries. But I've got to wait 3 years to do that again, unless I use something called a memorandum, which goes outside the council, and you write a memorandum, which most of us would call a proposed enactment or proposed resolution, to the board of RI and ask them to approve that out of session. We haven't done that yet. John Lawrence did suggest that we do that, but we haven't done that because I prefer to go through the worldwide discussion rather than having it discussed by a smaller number of people. And that way we'd get stronger endorsement. So now the council then meets every 3 years. I attended, and it's always in April. I attended in 2010, 13, and we'll be going to 2016 as the last conference elected me to go to that council. 532 districts, or whatever the number happens to be at the time, send a representative to Evanston, and we meet there. Hello Jeff, you'll see your picture. We meet in Evanston, and we meet for a week, gathering on Sunday for briefing and training, because most districts don't do any training, we do. And you meet through the week until Friday evening, and at that stage you must have completed all of the proposals that have been put before you, and then everybody departs for their home countries. The proposals which have been accepted are then edited and processed so that they speak Rotary language, and they're published in the new edition of the Manual of Procedure, the MOP, which I think most of you will have, and it looks like that. It's the Manual of Procedure, got the fingers in the way, so it gets published in that. And you'll see this one is a 2013 one. I received that because I was in Evanston in December. So then that becomes the current law, and the changes are incorporated in that edition. Now, we're changing step now to say what we're doing about changing the way the council operates. The council costs Rotary $3 million to operate, and you will see in your RI dues, that element of your Rotary dues, the RI dues, $1 US per year, which is a levy set aside to operate the council on legislation. And if you do your sums, 1.3 million Rotarians, $1 a year, we get actually $3.9 million in. And there is a bit of a surplus there that gets used up for other things, including the foundation. So anyway, the key thing to remember is it costs $3 million to operate the council. The biggest component is the officers' attendance and hotel and miscellaneous costs, which is $1.5 million, and airfares to get there, because we go from all over the world to Evanston, and that's $750,000, and equipment rental is $200,000. There are many of us who think that this is too expensive. We think that Rotary could probably do things a little differently, and so we've made our voice known to various people. And back in about August, I think it was August, I received an invitation from Ron Burton to join a special committee that he was convening to review the operation of the Council on Legislation. And I was flattered to start with, and secondly thought, what on earth is this all about? But I accepted his invitation, and shortly after that received a letter which told me that the committee would be called the Council Legislation Review Committee, chaired by Don Meebus, who's an American. The Vice Chairman is Tony Black from Scotland, and the members were Harry Fields, also an American, Bob Greeney from Australia, used to be in the US, and Carlo Michelocchi from Switzerland, and George Wheeler from the US. So just to recap, 1 Australian, 1 Swiss, 1 Scot, and 3 Americans form that committee. Now, the purpose of our committee is to review the operations and costs of the Council on Legislation. And when you sit down and think about that, you think, my God, what have I got myself into? Apart from anything else, you've got to fly halfway around the world. Certainly Rotary pays for that, and I've explained to you the costs. And some of the excess funds that they do collect are used for these sorts of costs. You can imagine, for 6 of us to fly to Evanston, whether you come from LA or you come from Canberra or you come from Glasgow, it doesn't really matter. There's a huge cost. And they had to accommodate us in the States while we were there and feed us while we were there, and they do that very well. But there's a cost. And all of us as Rotarians are paying that $1 per person per annum for that cost. So we met for 3 days in Evanston, and we came up with 4 things which we thought were pretty important, and they were that the Council on Legislation really could do a lot of its business electronically. And that would mean that people wouldn't have to travel around the world. It would mean you'd have a meeting like this one tonight, for which the cost is minimal. But we also recognise that if we hit that straight up, we probably would lose most votes, because there is a cadre in Rotary, whether you like it or not, there's a cadre in Rotary who see status in travelling around the world with Rotary, in going to Evanston or Chicago. There are, say, in some cultures, it's seen as a reward. It's also, for them, a visit to the United States, something that they would a chance of a lifetime. So they're not going to want to give up attending the Council on Legislation if they can. Now, because this is being recorded and will be published, those countries won't be named, but you will find, if you ever get the opportunity, that there are groups of people who see in Rotary some form of status that you and I don't. We joined Rotary for the reasons which we did, and we do the things that we do because we want to see matters improve. We want to make community service. We want to do things like Kin Tor, as you know, because you folks are the ones who started that. We would like to do good in the world, but we don't seek gratification for that. We just do what we can and the best we can. And we'd like to see the Council do the same. So the 6 people on the committee came up with sneaking up, or how would you put it, 1 step at a time, perhaps. There are 2 elements of the Council. One of them is resolutions. Now, resolutions do not change the Constitution. That means resolutions can be considered some other way. Why can't they be considered electronically, and why can't they be considered by the board? And we think, as an interim step, it's possible for any resolution to be proposed and at least annually to be looked at electronically, and those which can't be resolved electronically might be put aside and then considered at the next Council meeting. But if we did that, 2/3 of the proposals that go to the Council would be handled as needed. That overcomes the problem of having to wait 3 years to make what I would call bylaw changes. Resolutions change things like bylaws. That's really what they do. And in any legislation, bylaws can be changed by a committee without having to wait for an AGM. I think you understand the analogy there. So the first proposal we've made to President Ron Burton is that resolutions forthwith be considered electronically as and when they need to be considered, not to have to wait for a Council on Legislation. If somebody throws in a curly one, it can't be resolved electronically, then put it aside and put that to a council on legislation. Secondly, we don't think there's a need for all enactments, which are those things which do change the Constitution, to have to wait 3 years to be considered. Because you get the case where you and I come up with a proposal in March, but the time for lodgement was last December. You've got to wait another 3 years, so that makes 5 years. We think those things should be considered at least annually. And again, there's a chance that enactments can be considered electronically, and many of them won't be resolved electronically. Those could be put aside and dealt with at the next triennial council on legislation. But many of the others, which have been accepted, can be enacted straight away by the board, so that the Constitution can be changed more frequently than once every 3 years. As an interim step, we think going for the resolutions electronically straight away and dealing with enactments electronically with those not resolved being considered every 3 years, a good step and most likely winnable. The next contentious issue is how many people do you need at the Council on Legislation? There are 532 districts, therefore you have 532 past district governors who call themselves councillors swanning off to Evanston in April every 3 years. Same person can only go 3 times, that's the limit, so that fixes that. But most districts just award it to somebody every 3 years as a reward for, I don't know, service to Rotary perhaps. Not necessarily the best person to go to the council. Why not, since there's 39 zones, and you know we're in Zone 8 because we had the Zone 8 convention here last November, so why not have the zones, I said with 1 representative, and I got canned because that's actually the same as having the director doing that. The RI director, there's one for each of 39 zones. And if you only had 39 councillors, it might as well be the director. So the proposal reached a compromise where we said, how about 7 zone representatives go to the council? Now, if you had 7 zone representatives go to the council, there would be 238, I think, representatives. That's half the number. Now that cuts that $750,000 for travel and accommodation back to 375,000. The fact that we've handled resolutions electronically and some constitutional changes electronically means we've got a lot less proposals to consider, so we don't need to meet for 5 or 6 days. So the accommodation and meal costs and incidental costs for those 238 people who attend will be reduced by the amount of time that's been saved. And we think 3 days might be enough rather than 5 or 6 days. So they're basically what we've proposed. Now on Tuesday, the Council Services Office sent out to all past Council on Legislation representatives the outcome of our work last December. And it is a survey which asks all those past representatives and current representatives to share their experience with the rest of us, to weigh in on how successful the Council has been in achieving its mission, and to share their opinion of the possible new approaches proposing legislations, meeting and voting. And the survey is attached to that. Now the survey came back to me, because I'm on a subcommittee which is handling the survey, came back to me in December and has been tarted up by professionals who know how to do these things. And I think the format of the current survey, which has gone out, is pretty good. So the objective of doing a survey is to get a much broader view on the proposals which we are putting to President Ron Burton. When we get the results from the survey back by the 15th of February, they are to be consolidated, analysed, excuse me, and that data sent back to the 6 of us on the committee, and we will convene again in April to consider that information and confirm our recommendations to President Ron Burton so that that can start to be implemented virtually immediately, particularly with respect to the resolutions which can be handled electronically, and the step process of going from face-to-face meeting every 3 years to electronic meetings every year, so that then answers Ross's problem about getting legislation changed as and when it has to be changed. There are some other aspects about where the Council should meet. In years gone by, the Council used to meet all over the world, different country every year. That presents a lot of logistics problems, A, for language interpretation, because Rotary has, I think, 8 languages, and we need interpreters so that they can handle those translations from Japanese, English, Spanish, French, Chinese, and Arabic. I think there's 2 other languages. I can't remember what the other ones were. So we're trying to reduce the costs by doing it the way we've proposed. Once the survey has been reviewed and we can put the proposals to Ron Burton, then I think it'll happen fairly quickly. But if they knock it back, that would surprise me, but if they do knock back the recommendations, we will find another way to try and improve the process. Questions?
Thanks, Bob. It's Ross speaking. First and foremost, with regard to RIPEN, I think, having been a Boy Scout, I think that RIPEN is a Friday, Saturday, Sunday job. It's 2 complete days, and therefore doesn't equate with the RILO, which the Americans use from age 15 up. And it could, if the Boy Scouts send people on it, the suggestion might be that it could well become a badge that in fact would be worn with honour.
Yes, Ross, I completely agree with you, and that's what I think I should have said at the last council, but I was cut short. The process itself is quite truncated when you get there. You're allowed, each proposer is allowed 2 minutes to speak on their proposal, and there are 3 speakers for and 3 speakers against permitted after that, and then the conversation's cut off. And by the time the 3rd person, or 2nd, I think it was, got up and spoke about Boy Scouts America, we had 3, 4, and when I was given a chance to address the comments, they said time was up, and I didn't get a chance. So I will address it actually in the proposal next time, to say that, you know, things like Boy Scouts America or Scouts Australia can only be enhanced by the people who attend RIPEN, being part of their organisations as well. Not in competition with it, it complements and supplements their organisations.
Your Killjoy Sextet group has said that as a compromise you've gone back to 7 per zone to go. Why not have 1 zone rep plus a deputy?
That's another option. The trouble with it seems to be it's too close to the current situation where each zone has 1 RI director. And the director has a fairly broad range of things to do, but I think as long as we said 1 plus a deputy, they say, well, maybe the director can do that, and I think that's what people are thinking. So they're looking to have a different group of people who are not the director, and it could be 3. We discussed 3, and we discussed other numbers. 3 and 7 seem to be the 2 numbers that per zone that people were fairly happy with, and 7 was the one they were happiest with.
Right. Okay. Well, my final comment, I guess, is I guess with the survey, of course, everyone knows that surveys, you design them to achieve the end result that the committee wants anyway. Is that what's happened in this case?
No, I don't think it is. I think the committee has given to the professionals in RI, in Evanston, what it is that we're looking for, what the things that we are questioning and the things for which we're seeking views upon, and they have drafted a survey which asks those questions and gives the options which we think are worth considering, and then we ask the people who participate in the survey to give their personal views on each of those issues. It takes about 40 minutes to complete, but in my experience, if we're going to past councillors, generally those people have an interest in the council and legislation, although I do know of some instances where people have gone there and said, what a waste of time, and have come home and said it is a waste of time. But even those people, I think, still will give their honest answers, and that means we will get a broad cross-section of something like the last 3 or 4 councils. That's 2,000 people, and I think that'll be helpful.
Thanks. Thank you. That's the end of my question. Sorry, sorry I butted in front of you. Are there any other questions, David?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
No, I'm interested to learn about it. Bob, I'm very new to this, as you probably know, so I'm very interested to hear about all this stuff.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear what you've said, because I think there are many old and bold Rotarians who hide the subject because they don't understand it, and for them it's just so boring, uninteresting for them, that they won't tell others about it, which is a bit of a shame.
No.
To me, it's a chance for us to make Rotary a better place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks, Margaret. Any other questions from anyone? Well, if not, Bob, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us. It's a good subject that, as you say, people don't want to get their head around, because probably by the time it comes to that at the conference, they want to get out and have a coffee or whatever, and all they can think of is legislation, and legislation by definition is boring.
That's right.
So that's the way they feel about it. So, but thanks very much, and good luck with both of those committees. Well, I appreciate you coming on tonight, and we will, David, will kindly put that up on the on our website when you can.
All right.
Yeah, Bob,
Thank
can you send me a bio, and I'll put your photograph in the bio up as well?
Yep. Your email address in the directory, correct?
Yep.
All right, I'll do that.
Put on it.
Okay. Thanks, folks.
Thanks,
Pleasure
Bob.
joining you.